Coast Guard cutter. The commander of a revenue cutter there had heard about this piratical vessel that had come to St. Augustine and then apparently was going to head north. So he set out off the coast, and lo and behold, just as he hoped, he spotted a ship. He and his crew pursued. It was a 6-hour chase, but there's no way a brig loaded down with hundreds of captives is going to outrun a revenue cutter. Ultimately, the two ships are sailing side by side. Everyone is down behind their cannons with matches lit, ready to shoot, when suddenly the Antelope surrenders. At that point, the captain of the revenue cutter commands that the captain of the brig come over to his vessel with all of his papers. In reality, aboard the Antelope, they were busily throwing in weighted bags all the papers over the side because they knew they'd been caught. A boarding party was sent to the Antelope, and there they found what they already knew from the stench. You could smell slavers miles away, sailors said. She was loaded with human beings. They found 281. This is pretty much the same size ship right here. This was a ship captured in 1823. We're in the summer of 1820 right now. They counted 281 living captives and 2 more dead captives lying on the deck. The crew was arrested. You can read in the book about the piracy trial that's going to follow. And the Antelope itself is ultimately brought to Savannah, Georgia. It lands at Bolton's Wharf. If you're familiar with the waterfront of Savannah, and guys, you should be. You should be. Road trip. Did you hear me? Road trip. The historic district in Savannah is absolutely wonderful. Absolutely wonderful and fascinating. On that waterfront is a monument to the black family. It's meant to show the strength and the endurance of the black family, and they're standing there literally with chains at their feet. But what's not usually known is it's located at Bolton's Wharf, which was the usual place for landing slaves in Savannah. The Antelope was brought to Bolton's Wharf, about right here. And there, the United States Marshal awaited the delivery of the captives. Under U.S. law, he was supposed to take charge of the captives and was supposed to care for them until a decision was made about their fate, however that decision would be arrived at. He had, as I already mentioned, arranged for the horse racing track to house these people. He had planned for them to disembark from the ship. It's only 2 miles to the horse track, to walk the 2 miles. And there were not only stables, he had building supplies and tents and other things that the captains could set up for their own housing. He wrote in a letter to Secretary of State John Quincy Adams a few days later, though, about what he discovered when the ship came in. Now, Morrell was a hard man. He was known as a hard slave master. He owned more than 100 slaves himself. He owned 2 large plantations, and clearly from this letter, he was shocked by what he found. What he found was half of the captives were so sick and so dehydrated they could not even stand up. There was no way that these captives were going to be able to walk 2 miles. He had to hire wagons to transport them. But then, and perhaps the most moving part of the message, he says, to Secretary of State Adams, these are children. The average age of the 258, that's what we're down to, 258 survivors who arrived in Savannah, average age was under 14. 41% were under the age of 10. When I was in the archive and I figured this out, it took me, and this didn't happen right at first. I was several months, actually I was probably a couple of years into the project. When I figured this out, I just said, I'm going to offend somebody, I apologize. I said, holy shit. Right? And I think you feel the same way. This is suddenly a child abuse story, not just a story of illegal slaving. But even children as slaves are worth a great deal of money, an extraordinary amount of money. At a minimum, these children are valued at over $75,000. And it's hard to give a clear representation. I mean, every one of you would probably like to have $75,000 right now, right? But in reality, this is, in terms of current value, this is millions of dollars. So as you can imagine, a legal fight erupts immediately over who's going to get these captives. Who is going to be the person who actually enslaves them and gets the value that these captives are worth. Immediately, having heard the story of taking these captives from Spanish and Portuguese ships, the Spanish vice consul and the Portuguese vice consul file in Admiralty Court claiming that these captives belong to their citizens, not yet identified. And the Spanish claim 150, the Portuguese claim 180. How nice, that's that 280 that was originally found alive aboard the ship. Other people enter the case. The commander of the revenue cutter who rescued these people now enters court saying, I demand a share of salvage, which means whatever value was put on these captives, then he and his men ultimately would get 1/4, 25% of that value. And then even dear old John Smith himself, the pirate, he enters and files suit and says, no, they belong to me. They're mine. Right? Possession is 9/10 of the law or whatever. They belong to me. To everyone's surprise and startling, the bar, the lawyers in Savannah, the local United States attorney, a man named Richard W. Haversham, yes, that same Haversham family, that's Haversham County, that's the various Haversham roads, the streets all across the state of Georgia. Richard W. Haversham enters the case, and he says, I'm not putting a claim on these people because I can't. They are free and by law should be returned to Africa. Now think about this. Everybody's got this great deal in front of them. They're going to make tons of money out of this. And this guy from one of the wealthiest slave-owning families in Savannah comes in and says, no, forget about all the money you're going to make. These are free people, and they should be returned to Africa. He continues to plead this. The case goes through district court, and in district court, the federal district judge says, all right, there's an argument for this. 7 of the captives are going to be freed and given to the United States to be returned to Africa. 142 are going to be given as slaves to the Portuguese claimants. 63 are going to be given as slaves to the Spanish claimants, which by this time, February of 1821, about 7 months after these captives had arrived, the numbers have been whittled down to 212. What do we start with? 331. 212. Haversham says no. In fact, you may think about this. This is 1820, 1821. In the slave South, it's as the new cotton plantation system is beginning to spread rapidly across what will become the Deep South. It is big money. The production of cotton is going to become the most important and the majority part of America's foreign trade. It's an extraordinarily important economic element of our society, and he's saying to let these people go and worse, pay to send them back to Africa? No way. Habersham says, why? Why could this possibly be the case? This is like habeas corpus. They haven't shown, they haven't brought anybody in to say, you know, if your television was stolen, the police recovered it, maybe somebody's had this happen, you have to go down there and look at it and say, yeah, that's my TV, don't you? Right? No one's come into court and said, yeah, I recognize these guys. They're my captives. There's insufficient evidence. Plus, he says American law requires this. He appeals to circuit court. They lose in circuit court as well. Meanwhile, that U.S. Marshal that I mentioned, John H. Morrell, you can still find his house. He has this beautiful house that was built in 1818 in Savannah on Orleans Square. John H. Morrell has been putting more and more of the captives to work on a plantation he owns in an area called Bryant Neck. This is south of Savannah. This plantation produces Sea Island cotton, which is a little different from the short staple cotton we usually think of. It's very lucrative and very valuable. These are people working a field of Sea Island cotton. By November of 1820, Morrell has at least 100 captives working there. By the summer of 1821, the overwhelming majority of the surviving captives are working there. In November of 1822, the postmaster from Savannah went to Washington, D.C., and there he met with Secretary of War Calhoun. There he met with Secretary of State John Quincy Adams. There he met with the President of the United States himself, James Monroe. And he told a story. He said that Morrell was boasting that he was making $30,000 a year off of the labor of these slaves while billing the federal government for their care. And yes, by this point, he had already billed and been paid $21,000 for the care of these, feeding and care of these captives. He also boasted that he knew eventually he was going to lose control of these captives, so he intended to, quote unquote, swamp them. That meant literally work them to death. Work them to death. Because of this, the document with the names, you remember I showed you, was generated. Because the President and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of the Navy all required that Morrell give up his control of these captives. They were instead brought into Savannah and doled out to local wealthy people to work on their farms or in their homes. And this time, those people were required to give a bond, a guarantee of a certain sum of money that they would have to pay if they could not return the captives. But ultimately, it meant these captives went from working as slaves to working as slaves. Though at law, they're still not slaves. Ultimately, with the circuit court going against him, Habersham appeals to the United States Supreme Court. The case is set for the 1822 term. It was not heard. The case was set for the 1823 term. It was not heard. The case was set for the 1824 term. It was not heard. I'll let you buy the book and read about it to learn why. But a very powerful attorney, we don't usually know this, one of the most powerful attorneys and one of the most highly respected appellate lawyers in Washington, D.C. was a guy named Francis Scott Key. And a few drunken people in taverns were singing the Star-Spangled Banner thing he'd written, but there was no national anthem yet at that time. But he's a very powerful lawyer, and he's also a powerful part of a group called the American Colonization Society. They have created a colony on the coast of West Africa that's going to be called Liberia. And they're having a difficult time getting people to go to Liberia. The intention is that free blacks in the United States could go to Liberia and build a new nation without the restrictions free people of color faced in the United States. It's also a way to get the problematic class of free blacks out of the United States.